Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. At first, I'd like to thank Dr. Muqdadi and all organizing committee inviting me to speak about this important, I think, topic, which is a daily practice for the pediatricians, which is the celiac disease. In fact, we need to know a lot about the celiac disease in Arab countries. What about the diagnosis? What about the free gluten diet? So we will be based during our presentation on these different references from Arab countries and international publications. During my presentation, I present to you 4 different parts of the celiac disease in Arab countries at first. I'll move to free gluten diet. I'll move then to the free gluten diet in practical aspect in a published study. And finally, I'll speak about the national experiences in Arab countries about the development of celiac disease societies for patients. So what about the celiac disease in our region, in Arab countries? In fact, in analysis of the publications which were made till 2020, there was 35 different publications for celiac disease in Arab countries. About the celiac disease, 22 studies were conducted for the prevalence, risk factors, and the celiac disease among high-risk groups. 9 focused on the prevalence of celiac disease among general population, and finally, 4 of them reported the clinical aspect of celiac disease. This is a slide to demonstrate the distribution of these studies, publications, in Arab countries. The majority of them, the higher number was made in Saudi Arabia, as we see here, 5 in Syria, 1 in Libya, 3 in Tunisia, etc. In Syria, we made some studies about this important disease, celiac disease, since 2004 till 2018, and 1 is under publication for now. What about the prevalence of celiac disease in Arab countries? In fact, in all aspects of the analysis of the statistical studies in Syria and in Arab countries, we will find big variation between different countries. That's due to the limited sample size in the different studies. There is no larger studies done in Arab countries about the prevalence of celiac disease. Like that, we will find, for example, that celiac disease is variable from 0.1 to 3.7%. According to the country. For example, the higher percentage was registered in Saudi Arabia, the lower one was registered in Lebanon and Tunisia due to the limited number of the sample size. For the high-risk group, it is variable between 2 to 44%. So big variability, big differences between the different studies, even in the same country, due to the sample size. And finally, for the gender, it was demonstrated in Arab countries that celiac disease is more frequent in females than males. That's not according to the international studies, because as you know, it is more frequent in males than females. Look at this chart, which demonstrating the big variation between different countries, even in the same country, for the rate of the celiac disease and prevalence of celiac disease in different Arab countries. In fact, we know that celiac disease is underestimated in Arab countries, that there is a lack of the diagnosis, of the early detection, of the early diagnosis of the celiac disease. We know that we need more larger studies to define the real prevalence of celiac disease among general population and among the high-risk groups. And we know that we have a real reason to think that celiac disease is more frequent in our region, that we have a high level of consanguinity in our region and in Arab countries. For the diagnosis of celiac disease in Arab countries, based on the TTG and anti-endomysial antibodies, there is a big variability between countries for the lab tests sensitivity in the diagnosis of celiac disease, from 20 to 90%. So big differences. For example, in our country, in Syria, we made 2 publications about the sensitivity of TTG and anti-endomysial antibodies, and it was only 60%, comparing with 95% in Western countries, for example. That's due to many factors which are playing in the analysis, the machines, the manipulation of the analysis. For the age, in our countries, in Arab countries, there is 2 peak ages. The first one is from 1 to 3 years old. The second one is from 9 to 10 years old. So we are detecting celiac disease late. Later than the Western countries, there is no real early detection of celiac disease in Arab countries. For the short stature, we know that Western countries, 30% of children with celiac disease develop short statures. In our studies in Arab countries, it is variable between 7 to 53%. So this big variability is due to the limited sample size in Arab studies. About the irritable bowel syndrome, it is present in 36% of cases in Western studies, in USA, for example. In Arab countries, it is variable, and there is limited number of studies which were made for the estimation of the irritable bowel syndrome. It is around only 12%. Some other signs are detected in the Arab countries as symptoms and signs for celiac disease, like poor gain weight, like short stature, like abdominal pain, chronic diarrhea, as all international studies. What about the gender? As I said, in the Arab studies, it was clarified that the celiac disease is more frequent in females than males, which is not according to the international studies, due to the limited number of the inclusion criteria, the limited number of sample size in Arab countries for these studies. But in the inverse, some studies done in the region demonstrated that in larger sample size, for example, in blood donors, it was clear that celiac disease is more frequent in males than females. What about the high-risk groups? We know all that celiac disease is more frequent in some diseases, like, for example, Graves' disease, diabetes, iron deficiency, refractory anemia, etc. In Western countries, we know, for example, for the diabetes, that the celiac disease could be present in 1 to 11% based on the intestinal biopsies, higher than the general population. It is proved in our region also in different studies, and the variability is between 2 to 14%. Look at this chart, for example, which demonstrates the big variability of the celiac disease in different studies in Arab countries, from, for example, in Egypt, from 5 to 44%. Why? That's in the same countries, the sample size is different from study to study. For Graves' disease, it is proved in Western countries that Graves' disease is present in more than 5% of cases for celiac disease. It is proved in our region in some publications in Tunisia and in Turkey, for example, from 3 to 6%. In Down syndrome, different studies looked at celiac disease in Down syndrome. And it was proved, for example, in UAE that frequency is around 1%. In Saudi Arabia, it is around 11%. So big variability between Arab countries for the results of the celiac disease frequency and rate in Down syndrome. For the prevalence of celiac disease in relatives, we know all that in case that we are detecting a case of celiac disease in a family, it is more frequent to have celiac disease in the same family. It is proved in Western countries, and it is proved in the publications in Arab countries like Algeria, for example, and Turkey, around 1.7 to 3.4%. For the refractory anemia, it is one of the signs of celiac disease, and it is proved in our region with big variability between 12 to 70% of cases. So refractory anemia could be, iron deficiency anemia could be a sign of celiac disease, and we know that anemia is more frequent in case of celiac disease than the general population. What about the elevation of aminotransferase? We know that it is proved that around 7% of total elevation of the aminotransferase is due to celiac disease. It is proved in our region in a limited number of studies, for example, in Turkey and Iran, with big variability between 4 to 25% due to the limited number of inclusion criteria and sample size. For the treatment of celiac disease, as my colleague demonstrated before me in the presentation, that the only one way to treat celiac disease for now is the free gluten diet. For the adherence to the free gluten diet, it is not simple or easy to speak about the free gluten diet. In fact, in our region, it is estimated that the adherence is around 50% of the all population or patients who are in celiac disease situation. It doesn't work. Yeah. So for the calorie intake and nutrition intake, it looks that in some small limited studies in Arab countries, like in Egypt, for this study, for example, published in 2018, demonstrating that there is a low calorie intake, low protein intake, low carbohydrate intake. There is a deficiency in many nutrients, like, for example, it doesn't work. Yeah. Phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. So there is a problem in the nutrition intake in totally. Vitamins, for example, iron, zinc, copper, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin B1, and vitamin B2. So the implementation of the free gluten diet is not that easy after the diagnosis of the celiac disease. That's why we will move to the second part of my presentation. I speak about the free gluten diet, how to do it for each one of our countries in Arab countries. In fact, we know all that the free gluten diet is the only one way to treat celiac disease for the moment. It is a free wheat and barley and rye, as you know, lifelong, as my colleague mentioned before me, and there is no other way for treatment of the celiac disease. For the oat, it is allowed if the oat is not cultured in the same area of the wheat. So some recommendations allowed to take a non-contaminated oat for the celiac disease patients. Wheat is present in many, many foods, as you know. And it is not that easy to give to the patient after the diagnosis a simple paper saying that it isn't allowed to take wheat. We have to explain many, many details where wheat is present in foods. Is it present in our home foods, commercial foods, etc., junk foods? So we have to explain many details about the free gluten diet at the moment of the diagnosis for the celiac disease. We have to mention that each country has its own habits and particular food habits, as we know. For example, the food habits in Morocco is totally different from the food habits in Syria, totally different from Somalia, totally different from Yemen. So we cannot be based on, for example, free gluten diet in Syria to be applied, for example, in Somalia. Each country has to have his own particular free gluten diet. In fact, as you see here, food habits could vary from government to another. For example, when you are speaking about the food habits in Damascus, it could be totally different from the food habits in Deir ez-Zor. They are two different cities in the same country, but the habits are different. Which is important that the patient is not able to know the composition of the nutrient by himself. We have to explain to him many important notes and practical notes about the presence of wheat in different foods. And the patient needs a written protocol or on his mobile phone, for example, to look at the different items if there is wheat or not. 60 to 80% of the total patients with celiac disease found that it is not that easy to apply the free gluten diet. It is known internationally, not only in our region. For Syria, before 2009, we didn't have any special or particular detailed free gluten diet. It was simply given to the patient a simple paper saying that it isn't allowed to take wheat, but where weak it is. Have we practical aspect to answer to the patient's questions or not? Before 2009, we didn't have this special protocol. I'm speaking about Syria. That's why we published this booklet demonstrating the different aspects of the free gluten diet. This booklet is given to all patients with celiac disease at the moment of the announcement of the celiac disease after the intestinal biopsy. And it is now available online. So in this booklet, we analyzed 200 different items used in Syria in different governorates to say if it is allowed or not to take each one of the 200 foods in different governorates. This protocol contains 4 different parts. The first one is the forbidden foods, the allowed food, with practical aspect remarks, and which is very important that we have alphabet table for the alphabet table at the end of this booklet. As you see here, this alphabet booklet or tables mention the 200 different items, if it is allowed or not, to simplify the search of the different items. Doesn't work, huh? Right. Next. So as you see here, we analyzed many particularity in special foods in Syria, which are present in Syria, particular to Syria. For example, al-raha, al-awami, noga. My colleagues from Syria know very well the meaning of these different foods. And we analyzed amraddin, for example, mushabbak, if it is allowed or not in the case of celiac disease. Next. Next, yes. So the role of the parents is essential in the implementation of the free gluten diet. We are explaining this diet to the family to apply it during the lifelong. The patient will apply this free gluten diet as lifestyle. It is not simple to or easy to cooperate only with the children. We have to explain to the family. Next, please. So, practical observations are mentioned in this protocol to prevent the preparation of the food, for example, in the same family pots, to avoid the possible contamination during the preparation of the food. To forbid the eating of the food after removal of wheat derivatives. For example, for the roasted, is it possible to remove the cortex and take only the meat? It is contaminated by wheat. So we are explaining all these practical aspects to the patient at the moment of the announcement of celiac disease after the intestinal biopsy. To prevent the use of the cleaning tools for the pots, because if you use the same tools to clean the pots of the celiac patient, you are at risk to contaminate by gluten from other members of the family. And finally, we are teaching to, before. ما عم يشتغل. It doesn't work. Doesn't work. Before, please. Before. So we are asking the seller, we are teaching the patient and the family how to contact the seller or the manufacturer and ask them about the composition of each one of the items in commercial aspect and the items. Next, please. This free gluten diet is available online, as you see here, for free for all patients in PedMed website, which is a Syrian PedMed. It is a Syrian pediatric website, and it included the free gluten diet in this. This is some copies and photos of this free gluten diet, a general overview of the free gluten diet. Next. Yes, the non-allowed food. Yes, next, please. Some practical aspects of the non-allowed food. Yes. And special part with the allowed food, because many patients believe that some foods are forbidden during celiac disease, and in reality, it isn't forbidden. For example, potato is not forbidden, and some people believes if we don't explain to him that it is allowed, that they are forbidden. Next, please. Next. This is the table with alphabetic order from A to Z for the different items. Next, please. Growth curves are present to follow the growth of the children in the free gluten diet. Next, please. So, to know the implementation of the free gluten diet, is it practical or not? Is there difficulties or not? We published this publication in the Journal of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition for the European Society of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition about our experience. Next, please. Before, yes, for 15 patients who were diagnosed. Okay. For 15 patients, 53% of them are males. The mean age was 8 years old. It is too late to diagnose celiac disease at 8 years old. And what about the parent, if they remember or not the moment of the diagnosis of celiac disease? In 86% of cases, yes. The degree of the commitment to the diet. In fact, 34% of all patients found some difficulties in the implementation of the diet. As you see here, the errors are committed in schools, in relatives, and with friends, mostly. Parents find that it is difficult to implement the celiac disease diet. The answer is yes in 40%. Some form of difficulties, for example, difficulty with bread, sweet, commercial foods, junk foods, etc. Children who use clean tools to clean the pots, for example, in fact, only 14% of patients are using special tools to clean pots and to avoid decontamination. 100% of the parents are cooperative, there is no problem. And we concluded from this study that we have to concentrate and enlarge our experiences of celiac disease. We concluded that many challenges are present for celiac patients. They need advocacy, they need support, they need changing of the lifestyle, they need psychological support, develop the knowledge, develop the capacities for the food preparation without gluten, contact other patients to interact with them about the preparation of food without gluten, and finally, to have medical support, because as you know, celiac patients are at high risk for the other diseases like diabetes and other diseases. Like that, we thought that we have to develop our own celiac society in Syria for patients with celiac disease, which was launched in 2020. So there is now 2 years when we developed this celiac disease society in Syria. 5 objectives are put for this society: patient awareness, financial support, psychological support, lifestyle support, and case detection. Actually, we are at 625 members of this society. All of them are celiac patients with the cooperation with some doctors. Next, please. Yes, we implemented this society at first in the capital, in Damascus, and we expanded to Damascus countryside. And now we are working to expand to other governorates. As you see here, we are working to develop social network sites. We are organizing social events. Next, please. We are holding media seminars in TV and radio for celiac disease. We are providing gifts and special food to the new patients with celiac disease. We are doing training courses for the food preparation without gluten. And finally, we are doing several courses for the social network media. We are giving to the patient, as you see here, special ID of the celiac disease. He's using this ID to have lower cost of the medical costs, for example, lab tests, for example, going to the hospitals, to the some clinics with special doctors who are contracting with the society. In a review of the survey of 328 patients from this society, as we see here, for the children, the range age is around 5 to 15 years old. Doesn't work. The gender was 54% are males, which is interesting that 21% of celiac patients, they are considering themselves as celiac patients, but they didn't do the intestinal biopsy. So we are pushing to apply the intestinal biopsy for all patients who are in this society. For the commitment for the gluten diet, it is well in 55%, but it isn't well in 45%. Some difficulties are present in around 46% of cases. Financial challenges is present in mostly around 80% of all patients in the society. 74% of the patients in the society believes that it is too beneficial to have contact with other patients through social media of celiac disease. And in fact, 67% of patients need more information of celiac disease.
3 minutes.
Okay. Are free gluten diet products available? The answer is no in around 40% of cases in other governorates than Damascus. So we have limitation in the distribution of the products in all governorates in Syria, because the contact between governorates is not that easy and the transportation is highly costly. Did you detect other diseases in themselves? The answer is no in 55%. We are pushing all patients to do the detection of the other diseases like diabetes and Graves' disease, etc. They need psychological support in 66%. This is some photos of our activities, the go-to-school activities for the celiac children. Some presentations on celiac disease in 2021. The celebration of the International Celiac Disease in 19th of May 2021. And the participation in the scientific congress and conferences like pediatric gastroenterology and nutrition last year in 2021 in Tartus city in Syria, the entrainment event, the psychological support of the new patients with the free gifts, and many presentations are available online to explain to the patients many things about the celiac disease by members and doctors in the society. Many interviews in the radio and TV were done to explain more and more about celiac disease. And finally, how to prepare free gluten diet foods by practical aspect by the different members of the society. We are pushing to use more and more the social media like WhatsApp, like everything else, Telegram, etc., to answer the questions, to explain more and more about the celiac disease. I have to thank Dr. Husseini to give me the link of the Saudi Arabia Society of Celiac Patients. They has many other activities. So we are not in Syria the only one country to develop like society. There is many activities in other countries in the Arab countries. Thus, in conclusion, next please. We know that celiac disease is prevalent in our countries. Next. We need more larger study to define the real prevalence of celiac disease in our countries. We have to have practical aspect clarifying the need to develop national free gluten diet, especially special free gluten diet for each one of the countries. Many challenges are present for celiac disease patients in the country, in the region, and we need to develop our national celiac disease societies in Arab countries. Thank you for your listening. I'm ready to...
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. I hope we'll get a copy of this booklet in the future.